Hi, I'm Craig Holman. I'm the absentee panelist. Sorry for not being in person to present my paper. I was in a car accident a while ago and I thought I'd recover by now, but I'm still not really able to walk. So I'm just going to tape my presentation, and my paper is available there. It's online. My paper is The Nature and Risks of AI-Generated Deepfakes in Political Communications. Artificial intelligence, AI, is essentially computerized deep learning models that take raw data and produces computerized images and voices. It's not new. AI has been around for quite some time. However, it's only in very recent years that the technology behind AI has become so sophisticated and so well developed that the images and the voices that are portrayed now are absolutely convincing. They look very, very real to the point where it's almost indistinguishable to tell the difference between an AI-produced person or voice and a real person or voice. And that poses a significant problem in political communications because it can be highly deceptive. We've seen, beginning really in the last election cycle, 2024, a number of deep fake ads that would depict a candidate saying or doing something that the candidate never ever did. It's all just computerized production. The candidate is not part of the ad and the pictures aren't real, but it looks entirely real. I realize it can be a problem. When I first saw one deepfake produced by the RNC entitled Beat Biden, and it came out right after Biden announced that he was running again in the 2024 election, and it depicted Biden and Kamala Harris off in a room laughing, and then it flashed to Wall Street showing a financial collapse and chaos on Wall Street, and then it went to showing waves of like 80,000 illegal immigrants flooding across the border, and then showed China bombing Taiwan, and finally it ended with depicting San Francisco in a police lockdown because of the fentanyl problem. All of it was fake. None of it really happened. And I realized that it was so convincing that if it isn't really properly disclosed to viewers, it can actually provide a fraudulent depiction of a candidate doing or saying something they never ever would do. And this could be very problematic when it comes to political communications, especially political ads. Because it can easily deceive voters, and the more voters can't trust what's being said or what they're seeing on TV or hearing on the radio or receiving robocalls on the phone, the more voters are going to lose trust in elections. And given the wave of mistrust and misinformation that we're already facing in elections, that can actually imperil democracy itself. Throughout 2024, we saw a number of these deepfakes, besides the Beat Biden one. Then DeSantis came out with one showing Donald Trump hugging Dr. Fauci. Trump responded with showing DeSantis with George Soros. And Dean Phillips, a Democratic candidate running against Biden, did a fake robocall in New Hampshire, where it was the identical voice of Biden calling voters saying, "Don't bother voting, save your vote for the general election." This can be really problematic. Artificial intelligence can be good. It can reduce the cost of campaigns. So for instance, if a campaign wants to show a picture of the Rocky Mountains, artificial intelligence can do it at almost no cost. So it can be useful, but when we get to what's called deep fakes, this can be highly fraudulent and deceptive. And deep fakes are when candidates are falsely depicted doing or saying something that they never did. It can be a really powerful weapon, you can imagine, for outside groups, especially if they air a deep fake of a candidate doing something, horrible, like weeks before the election, before the candidate really has a chance to try to clear the record. The outcome of the 2024 election was not really tainted that much by deep fakes, but we saw how it can be. And so this can be very problematic. I used in this paper a brand new database called the Political Deepfakes Incidents Database that really was just started a few years ago as a project from Northwestern University and UL Research Institute. It had student coders, largely on social media, mostly Twitter, trying to identify deep fakes and then doing an analysis of them. First, the number of deep fakes, and secondly, how credible they are, and third, whether they actually resulted in some harm to society itself. One of the most interesting things is the radical onslaught of deepfakes now. This database in 2016 found only one deepfake. In 2024, it jumped all the way up to 624 different cases of deepfakes. And then in 2025, just through July 25th, there were another 586 deepfakes identified by these student coders. Now, that sounds like a lot in itself, but what happens with each of these individual cases, they get viewed millions of times and then shared and sent all over the place and viewed billions of times within a short time period. And, so we're seeing this radical onslaught of deepfakes, so far mostly on Twitter, but, it'll be just a matter of time before they start moving into mainstream media, television and radio. And the target of these deepfakes, as you can see with this next chart, is almost always individuals. And to be specific, that'll be a politician or a public figure. That tends to be the overwhelming target of deepfakes. Groups are an occasional target. Journalists and a governmental entity, also occasional targets. It's mostly individual candidates or public figures. And the subject of the deepfakes is overwhelmingly the government or legal system, as you can see on this next chart, which involves things like elections, election integrity, the honesty of government. So it's the government and the legal system that gets attacked most often with deepfakes. A distant second is personal scandal. Deepfakes tend to play up any kind of sexual scandal or personal scandal that may be related to the politician. And wrapping up on the lesser frequencies, crisis and war, deepfake regulation itself, and attacking marginalized groups, such as illegal immigrants, for instance. But it's mostly the governmental system and elections that gets attacked. And when we take a look at this database on the next chart, you'll see the database has both cheap fakes and deep fakes. Cheap fakes are real pictures of candidates and just doctored up. somewhat. They were mostly what was being done prior to the refinement of artificial intelligence. And now, these days, if you take a look at the database from 2023 through 2025, you'll see that deepfakes are clearly overwhelming. There's about 1.4 billion cheap fakes in the views of cheap fakes in the database, and over 12 billion views of deepfakes. So deepfakes clearly are the favorite source of disinformation or misinformation on social media. And you can tell that deepfakes are far more convincing because of the number of views that I just talked about. Also the number of shares. Cheap fakes get shared about 70,000 times in that time period in that database, but deepfakes get shared about 686,000 times. So again, clearly deepfakes tend to be more credible and more effective and more convincing, and therefore tend to be favored on the in the database. You can also see that by the number of likes. When it comes to cheap fakes, we have 1,853 likes in the database, and likes means who's ever viewing it just really liked it. And deepfakes, 111,670. So deepfakes clearly are just more credible, more realistic looking, more convincing, and if it's purveying false information, more deceptive than cheap fakes. Also, the database went into one subjective area that is rather troubling, and that is whether they cause any harm. In the largest bulk of deepfakes in the database, the student coders could not identify any specific harm associated with it. Out of 710 cases, they identified no harm. However, in almost half of the cases, there was some form of harm that the student coders identified. And by harm, what they looked at was basically news accounts as to whether something occurred roughly at the same time as the deepfake was being portrayed. And they found political interference was the most harmful effect of deepfakes. Political interference being deepfakes that call into question the integrity of the electoral process or politics in general. And they found violations of human rights, a distant third with 85 cases, violence with 61 cases, and financial loss at the bottom with only 14 cases. However, the important thing here is to recognize that literally about half of the deepfakes were identified by student coders as coinciding with specific harms that they noticed in the news. So the bottom line is these deepfakes are becoming so prevalent. So far they've been limited to social media for the most part, but no doubt they're going to spread to mainstream media and probably in this upcoming election cycle. And so it seems to justify some form of regulation, specifically disclosure. When the public has been polled on whether or not deepfakes should be disclosed to the viewers, voters overwhelmingly, strongly support at least a disclosure requirement. There are some states that are trying to ban deepfakes altogether, especially near an election. But other states are pursuing mostly the disclosure system. Now, as a lobbyist and public citizen, when I recognize that deepfakes are going to be a problem in political communications. I have worked with especially Senator Klobuchar in trying to get some federal legislation moving. And the legislation that I favor, which is part of the appendix of my paper, a model law there, is disclosure. Largely because I'm concerned about regulating content of campaign ads. We generally don't regulate content. With the campaign finance laws, we will identify who paid for the ad and how much they spent on ads, but never does it actually say that the candidate or the campaign is lying, or whatever's being described never actually happened. But when it comes to deepfakes, it's qualitatively different, since you can't really tell the difference as to whether a real candidate or a computer image of a candidate is depicting what the candidate says or does. To give voters a chance, there should at least be some sort of disclosure system noting that this is entirely computer generated. You don't have to say whether it's true or false, just say this never really happened. This is a computer generated depiction of a candidate talking. I wasn't able to get Congress to start moving on this type of legislation. So I produced that model law, and that's the appendix of my paper, and focus on states. And at that time, there were only 4 states that had some type of regulation of deepfakes. They were California, Washington, Texas, and Minnesota. Now, California and Washington had disclosure laws. Minnesota and Texas just outright banned deepfakes near an election period. I was promoting especially the disclosure system, but I'll go with banning deepfakes also if that's what a state chooses to do. And we've been pushing these types of regulations at the state level ever since the beginning of the 2024 election cycle. And today, as you can see on the next figure, 48 states now have some laws on the books addressing deepfakes, either banning deepfakes or requiring disclosure that it's a computer-generated ad. There has been a bit of a pushback by industry to try to cancel these types of laws. The latest effort was at the federal level, where the artificial intelligence industry, argued before Congress that it's very difficult for them to have to abide by 50 different laws at the states that are all different. And so they introduced a bill saying that there would be federal preemption over all state laws. So it would cancel all the state regulations and replace it with a federal regulation. Sort of makes sense. The problem is, which the industry knew, is there is no federal regulation. There's nothing at all. And so the effort was purely to cancel all the different state laws and allow deepfakes and the deepfake industry to operate uninhibited and without any kind of disclosure. The bottom line, my conclusion, is that deepfakes have the strong potential for causing harm to not only a candidate and a candidate's reputation, but the whole integrity of the political process itself. And as a result, we need to have at least a disclosure that what you are seeing or hearing is just computer generated, if it is a deep fake. Disclosure, voters really deserve and need to have that type of knowledge that what they are seeing may entirely be fabricated by a computer and not real. So that's the bottom line of my paper. And I'm going to leave you with some words of warning from Barack Obama about the dangers of deepfakes.